Autumn of 1878. The wind off the Absaroka Range swept across the plains, carrying cold air and red dust. Naomi Carter pulled her frayed shawl tighter around her shoulders, her cracked hands gripping a worn cloth bag. That bag held all she owned: a few patched dresses, a small Bible, and a faded photograph of her mother. The road from Wyoming to Montana had been rough, but to Naomi, her past was harder to swallow than the dusty miles behind her. Rumor rode faster than horses. Back in Cheyenne, whispers trailed her like shadows. Naomi Carter once worked in a low saloon, they said, and she knew how to use her eyes to earn coin. Whether true or not no longer mattered. The slander had built a wall between her and any chance of a home. And so, when she stood before the heavy wooden gate carved with the name Hawthorne Ranch, Naomi knew she had no place left to turn back to. The gate creaked open. A few cowboys near the stables looked up. Laughter cut through the cold morning air. "Look there, a colored girl come begging for work," one whistled, his tone sharp with scorn. "Bet she's better suited for the saloon," another added, and the group burst into laughter. Naomi drew a long breath, kept her step steady. She did not turn her head, did not answer. Straight-backed, she knocked on the main house door. It opened to a man in late middle age, his hair graying, his eyes cold as ice. Samuel Hawthorne, master of the ranch. Her voice came rough, worn by the long road. "Sir, I've come to ask for work. I can cook, clean, tend stock. I only ask for a chance." Samuel's eyes weighed her from head to heel. Silence stretched, broken only by the wind on the porch. Then another figure stepped out from behind him, a broad-shouldered man in a sun-faded shirt, gray eyes quiet as the sky after storm. Elias Hawthorne, the eldest son. Elias said nothing, only stood. Yet Naomi sensed something different. There was no contempt in his gaze, only a steady measure. And for an instant, a flicker that felt like respect when he saw her spine straight, her chin lifted. Samuel snorted, voice curt. "This place ain't for just anyone. Ranch work needs hands that are steady, clean, and mouths that know when to stay shut. Can you do that?" Naomi swallowed hard, clutching her bag tighter. "I can, sir." "I fear neither dirt nor hard work." A laugh rang from the stable. "Don't fret, she's already used to dirt." Heat rushed to Naomi's cheeks, but she did not lower her head. She held Samuel's stare, and the look gave him pause. Elias shifted a step forward, as if ready should things turn. It was a moment small enough most missed, save Naomi. At last Samuel gave a slow nod. "Fine. You'll start in the kitchen. If the food's worth eatin', you stay. If not, you're gone by sunrise. Understood?" Naomi bowed her head. "Yes, sir." They led her to the kitchen, set apart from the main house. The air reeked of smoke and old meat, the walls stained deep with years of cooking. Pots and iron pans hung in disorder, left behind by the last cook who had quit. Naomi rolled up her sleeves and set to work. As she stoked the fire and set water to boil, the voices outside carried in, mocking words, boots striking the porch harder than needed, laughter thrown sharp as stones. They wanted her to hear, to break before she began. Naomi bit down hard, fed the fire, chopped the meat. Her hands, once trembling from years of rejection, now shook from the strain of keeping her own flame alive. By evening, she carried out a steaming pot of stew. The cowboys ate with sneers, tossing jabs between mouthfuls. Yet bite by bite, the room grew quieter. One muttered, "Not bad, for a colored girl." Another smirked, "At least we won't starve tonight." Naomi said nothing, clearing the table in silence. But when she lifted her eyes, she found Elias watching from the doorway. His gray gaze held something unspoken. Not pity, not disdain. Only the sense of a man who looked past the dust to see the person within. Her heart kicked against her ribs, sudden as the rush before a snowstorm. She dropped her eyes quickly, masking the tremor that rose inside. But Elias stepped forward, an empty bowl in hand. He set it down and spoke, slow and measured. "You cook well. This ranch, it needs folks who know how to stand tall." Naomi looked up, their eyes meeting. Among smoke, whispers, and heavy judgment pressing close, there came a moment plain yet clear, her first true recognition. She nodded, tightening the apron at her waist. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne." He shook his head, the corner of his mouth lifting, almost a smile. "Elias. Just call me Elias." Then he turned away, leaving Naomi alone in the kitchen, her chest swelling with a warmth edged by fear. That night, lying on the hard bed in the small room behind the kitchen, Naomi knew nothing was certain yet. But for the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. At dawn, the ranch kitchen came alive with smoke and the clatter of knives. Naomi Carter had risen before first light, her hands moving quick as she sliced potatoes and chopped onions. She meant to prove she was worthy of the slim chance she had been given. Though laughter and watchful eyes outside never ceased, Naomi knew only tireless labor could keep her here. The stew bubbled hard over the fire, sweat breaking across her brow. Her coarse dress clung damp against her back, but she did not stop. Each loaf of bread, each slice of salt pork she set on the table felt like she was laying down her very life. Near noon, the cowboys burst in, boots pounding, laughter rolling. They sniffed at the air, feigning surprise at the neat table and hot food. One sneered, "Didn't reckon a saloon stray could cook fit to eat." Naomi pressed her lips shut, carried another pot of beans to the table, and set it down without a word. She bowed her head as though deaf, but her dark eyes burned, holding fast to a thread of pride. Then the floor betrayed her. Water had spilled from the washtub, leaving the boards slick. Naomi slipped hard, her back striking the floor. Her skirt caught on a chair edge and tore, ripping wide from thigh down. In the rush of her breath, she felt the cold air on her skin, the fabric fallen open. For an instant, the room froze silent, then burst into whistles and coarse laughter. "Didn't think the best dish would be off the table," Vince Morgan drawled, his mouth twisting cruel. Naomi's cheeks burned hot. She clutched at the torn cloth, but the harder she pulled, the more it exposed. Eyes leered from every side. She longed to vanish. Then a figure strode forward, cutting through the noise like a knife. Elias Hawthorne. He spoke no word. In Naomi's ragged breath he was already there, shrugging off his dark work shirt. The lighter one beneath stretched across a back hardened by years of labor. He dropped to one knee beside her, the motion so plain and sure that the room fell silent. Naomi startled as his hand brushed near her thigh. Not rough, not claiming, but to wrap his heavy shirt around her waist. The warmth of his body clung to the cloth, shielding the tear, steadying her as she rose. "Stand," Elias said low, his voice a rasp of gravel. One hand held the shirt firm around her, the other lifted her by the elbow. Naomi felt the calloused grip, and for a breath, the kitchen was still as stone. She swayed on her feet, her heart pounding, shame fading into a trembling of another kind, strange and fierce. Vince barked laughter, though it came thin now. "Well, Elias, since when do you play knight to saloon cast-offs?" Naomi braced for Elias to cast her aside with a word, but his hand stayed firm on her shoulder, a silent claim. His reply was quiet, yet carried across the room. "Enough, Morgan. Eat, or leave the kitchen." The room shook with the weight of it. No man had dared cut Vince Morgan short before. He glared at Elias, then turned his venom on Naomi. But those storm-gray eyes were hard as iron, and Vince slammed his spoon down in defeat. Naomi trembled still, but she did not flee. She stood there in Elias's shirt, her chin high. Somehow, his silence had become a wall between her and the scorn. After the meal, when the room had cleared, Naomi slipped the shirt from her shoulders, meaning to hand it back. But Elias's hand lingered on it a moment. He looked down at her, words unspoken, heavy in his gaze. At last he only nodded and draped it back across her shoulders. "Keep it. Nights run cold here." His voice was low, rough as wind through the grass. Naomi found no answer, only lowered her head and bit her lip, the warmth of the cloth holding her close. That night, in her narrow room behind the kitchen, Naomi sat long, tracing the tear in her dress with trembling fingers. Each memory of the mocking laughter tightened her chest. But another image rose, Elias's hand settling the shirt over her, his eyes steady, his touch like a promise never spoken. For the first time in years, Naomi felt she was not wholly alone. That Montana morning looked no different than any other. Golden light spilled over grass still wet with dew, horses called from the stables, and the faint smell of kitchen smoke lingered in the cool autumn air. Inside the ranch kitchen, Naomi Carter worked her knife steady through vegetables, holding tight to her own quiet. Yet outside, the whispers grew sharper, carried by the wind as though meant to test her patience. "That girl once worked in a saloon back in Wyoming." "Yeah, they say she served more with a smile than with her hands." "Elias has lost his mind, letting her set foot on this ranch." Naomi heard it all. Each word cut like a knife across old wounds she had long tried to bury. True enough, she had worked in a saloon, but not to please men. She had washed glasses, scrubbed floors, carried trays. Jobs no one else wanted, but for her, the only way to survive. Few cared to see that truth. Folks chose instead the part of the story that made them feel taller. She laid the knife down, drew a deep breath. For a moment her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. Silence, she thought, could be a shield. But silence too often sounded like agreement with a lie. That evening, when chores were done, Naomi stepped into the backyard. Moonlight washed the grass. Autumn wind tugged at her cloak. Elias leaned against the fence, staring at the wide sky. He turned at her footsteps, something conflicted and fierce in his eyes. "Naomi." His voice came low, weighted. "I've heard the talk." She gave a small nod, her gaze darkening. "So have I. But I don't feel the need to explain. They don't care to hear the truth." Elias moved closer, stopping only a few paces away. His eyes searched deep, as if reaching for memories she'd tried to bury. "There's something I must tell you." Something from long ago, back in Wyoming. Naomi lifted her head, a flicker of fear inside. "I saw you once, Elias said, slow and heavy. At that saloon. I was there with a few men. They laughed at you, threw words meant to cut. And I stood by. I said nothing, did nothing. I was silent. His voice caught. His hand gripped the fence as though for anchor. I've carried that shame since. Because from that moment, I knew I was a coward. I let a woman stand alone beneath their ridicule. And that woman was you. Naomi froze. The memory returned. Dim lamps, smoke thick in the air, laughter sharp as glass. She remembered the faces, the eyes, and now to know Elias had been among them, yet turned away, tightened her chest to breaking. She turned aside, tears pressing. Do you know the worst part? It wasn't their jeers. It was when I searched the room and found not a single eye willing to stand with me. Elias bowed his head, voice trembling. I'm sorry. If I could go back, I would not be silent. But all I can do now is confess my fault and vow never again to let you stand alone. Silence fell, only the sound of night insects and wind moving through trees. Naomi closed her eyes, letting one tear fall. But this tear carried more than pain. It carried the truth that Elias had chosen to face his failing instead of bury it. She turned back, eyes wet but steady. I don't need you to be perfect, Elias. I only need to know that when tomorrow's storm comes, you won't be silent. His gaze held hers, no longer turning away. And in that moment, Naomi saw it clear. The past leaves scars, but courage to confess is the first step toward healing. From that day on, Naomi no longer shrank from the rumors. When voices repeated them, she lifted her head and worked on, not defending, not bowing. Her calm drained the malice of its power. More than that, whenever doubt brushed close, Elias's steady eyes gave her ground to stand on. Within her, Naomi understood. Truth can be twisted, but it cannot erase resolve. And now, she stood not only for herself, but for the women who one day would step through the doors of Carter's kitchen. The night wind swept across the prairie, steady and dry. The moon had just risen above the ridge, silver light glinting off the white fences that circled Hawthorne Ranch. Naomi was setting aside the last of the fresh bread, the warm scent still clinging to the kitchen walls, when a sudden shout tore through the dark. Fire! Fire in the barn! Naomi dropped the cloth in her hands and ran. At the far end of the yard, flames leapt high, red and raging, swallowing the hay barn whole. Sparks shot skyward, carried fast by the wind. Cowboys scrambled in panic, some hauling buckets, others driving horses away from the blaze. In the din, Naomi heard it, a thin, piercing cry, a child's cry, rising above the roar. It came from the small room built alongside the barn, where the workers' children sometimes slept while their parents worked the night shift. She did not stop to think. Naomi ran straight toward the fire. "Naomi, stop!" someone shouted, but the wind and the flames swallowed the warning whole. Heat seared her face, the air burning as though alive. Naomi tore a strip of her skirt, wrapped it around her arm, and pushed into the choking smoke. Her eyes stung, lungs catching, but the cries guided her forward. In the corner, she found two children huddled together, eyes wide with terror. "Come here, little ones," Naomi rasped, coughing hard as she knelt to gather them close. The smoke pressed thick, her head spinning, hair catching sparks that singed as they fell. Her bare arms burned as if stabbed by 1,000 needles. Still, she held the children tight, groping her way back toward the door. A crash thundered behind, beams collapsing in a spray of sparks. Naomi staggered, blinded, thinking the way was lost. Then, suddenly, an arm like iron wrapped her waist and yanked her clear. Elias. He pulled Naomi and the children out through the smoke, falling hard to the dirt beyond. He gasped for breath, one hand still gripping her as though he feared she might vanish back into the fire. "Are you mad?" Elias growled, voice breaking in the coughs. But his storm-gray eyes held no anger, only raw fear. Naomi clutched the children, sobbing. They were still inside. I couldn't leave them." Elias looked at her face, blackened with soot, hair scorched, hands blistered. His grip tightened on her shoulders, as if to etch the sight into memory. The crowd had gathered, throwing buckets of water, shouting orders. But when Naomi staggered forward with the children in her arms, silence rippled through them. Men who once sneered, women who once whispered, now they only stared, their scorn burned away. Awe flickered in their eyes. One mother broke from the crowd, crying out as she seized her child. She dropped to her knees, grasping Naomi's scorched hand. "God bless you, if not for you." Naomi trembled, words lost in her throat. Tears stung, but before they could fall, Elias's arm was firm around her shoulders, drawing her against his chest. She felt the heat of him, the thundering beat of his heart matching her own. His calloused hand rested against the back of her neck, wordless, yet binding as a vow. In the glare of the flames, Naomi and Elias stood side by side, the children safe in their arms. Around them, the community watched, hushed. Out of that silence, something shifted. Where once there had been only suspicion, now respect took root. Naomi understood then. This night the fire had consumed more than a barn of hay. It had burned through the walls of prejudice, laying bare a truth. She was no longer the outsider. Dawn after the fire lay across the prairie, in a thin veil of mist, pale as a worn blanket. Smoke still curled from the ruined hay barn, the air heavy with ash. Naomi sat on the kitchen porch, her hands wrapped in rough bandages, red burns marking the skin beneath. Her curls were ragged, singed ends falling across her brow. Weariness dragged at her shoulders, yet in her eyes shone a strange light, the quiet belief she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Ranch hands passed by. Some gave a slight nod in place of greeting. One set a small loaf of bread before her without a word, then walked on. Naomi understood. Today's silence was different from the contempt of her first days here. Elias stepped from the main house, his wrist still bandaged where flame had scorched him, pulling her out. He lingered a moment, watching her, then turned as the heavy front door opened behind him. Abraham Hawthorne emerged. The old man's hair had turned white, his frame lean but still holding the weight of a life spent building this ranch. In his hands was a roll of parchment, its edges new and stiff. Workers gathered, murmuring. Elias's brow tightened, sensing what was coming. Abraham stopped at the porch, his gaze heavy but resolute. He studied Naomi, then spoke slowly, his voice carrying clear for all to hear. "Naomi Carter, last night you risked your life to save the children of this ranch. No man here has the right to deny such courage. From this day, the land south of the creek is yours." He unrolled the parchment, a land deed, stamped fresh with the red seal of the town court. A stir ran through the yard. Men stared wide-eyed, unbelieving that Abraham Hawthorne, hard, unbending, would stand to declare such a gift for a black woman. Naomi sat frozen, eyes wide on the paper. Her heart pounded, not from greed, but from the weight of something she had never dreamed. Her name bound to a piece of land, a thing her parents had never once dared hope for. Elias's jaw tightened. His voice came slow but firm. "Father, if this land is born of true recognition, Naomi deserves it. But if it is only to quiet gossip or out of pity, then it carries no worth." Abraham's grip hardened on the deed, his old eyes flashing steel. "I do not bargain. I give back to her the fairness she has earned." Father and son locked eyes, the distance between them thick as a wall built over years. Naomi felt the weight of Elias's anger, his pride straining against his father's judgment. She rose. Her bandaged hands trembled as she stepped between them, but her voice was steady. "Elias." He turned, gray eyes storming. Naomi lifted her hand and laid it gently against his cheek. Her touch was rough, yet tender, a gesture bold, almost desperate. "Not everyone changes at once," she whispered, "but that does not mean they do not wish to." The yard fell still. Elias stood motionless, eyes trembling as he looked into hers. In that gaze he saw himself, the man who once stood silent while she was mocked in Cheyenne, who had hidden from truth out of fear. Now, in Naomi's eyes, he saw something he knew well, the hunger to be recognized, to step out of the shadow of the past. His shoulders dropped, his breath heavy. He no longer argued, no longer turned away. He simply let her hand fall back, leaving its warmth on his skin as a reminder that forgiveness and trust do not begin with perfection, but with a single step. Abraham extended the deed to Naomi. She took it with both trembling hands. The parchment weighed more than her body could bear, holding not only earth, but a belated admission that she, too, had a place. A few workers near the front began to clap, hesitant at first, then spreading until a small cheer rose. Naomi bowed her head, tears spilling free. But when she lifted her face, Elias was watching her still. His gaze no longer burned with anger, but with a depth of understanding. That justice comes in many shapes, some quiet, some fierce. That night, Naomi sat in her small room behind the kitchen, staring at the deed laid on the table. Her burned hands throbbed with pain, but she rested them on the paper, stroking its surface as if touching a dream. She thought of her parents, laborers all their lives, never once daring to believe their daughter might hold land of her own. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the yard. Naomi closed her eyes and saw again the moment her hand touched Elias's face. In that instant, she had dared to give trust, not only to him, but to herself. And she knew from here nothing would be the same. The storm came sudden, as if the whole Montana sky collapsed in a single frozen breath. Wind screamed through the passes, driving walls of snow until the ranch vanished into a white haze. Wooden doors rattled, cattle bellowed in panic from their pens. But the sound that froze every heart was when Andrew, the 16-year-old hand, was nowhere to be found in the blizzard. They said to step out in weather like this was to sign your own death notice. Yet Elias pulled on a sheepskin coat, tied a scarf tight at his throat, and strode into the storm against all pleas. Naomi stood on the porch, watching his figure swallowed by endless white. The wind tore at her chest, but the true pain was the thought that she might never see him return. Hours dragged like centuries. Just as the men began to lose hope, Naomi spotted a shape staggering from the blur. On Elias's shoulders hung Andrew's limp body, while Elias himself sank to his knees, lips blue, breath broken. "My God!" Naomi cried, plunging into snow up to her knees. She helped lift Andrew with the others, then threw her arms around Elias, dragging him inside. The cold pouring off him seeped into her skin, making her tremble, not from frost, but from fear. In the small cabin, fire crackled low. Naomi knelt beside him, fumbling with frozen buckles, stripping away the coat stiff with ice. His shirt beneath clung wet and frigid, so cold it startled her touch. "Don't sleep, Elias. Hear me? Don't close your eyes." Her voice broke. Elias only shuddered, his gaze dim in the firelight. Naomi clenched her teeth, pulled the wool blanket over them both. Her hands rubbed hard along his arms, his chest, pressing her body close to lend him what warmth she had left. A shuddering breath left him, fragile yet alive. Naomi held tighter, whispering as though in prayer. "You can't leave me. You can't." Outside, the blizzard roared on, but within the room there was only firelight and ragged breath. When Elias opened his eyes again, he found Naomi's brown eyes glistening so near that one tilt of his head would have brought their lips together. "Naomi," his voice rasped, heavy with smoke and snow. She leaned down, ready to speak, but his trembling lips brushed hers. A fleeting kiss. Awkward. Shaking, like a spark catching wet wood. Naomi stiffened, then felt her heart hammer, the cold of the world melting in one beat. They sat pressed close, Elias's hand, still unsteady, seeking hers, gripping as though afraid to lose it. Naomi lowered her forehead to his, breath mingling in the haze of smoke. In that moment, all the world's scorn and judgment fell away. Two souls long bent beneath the weight of others' eyes now allowed themselves the small mercy of needing someone. By near 4 in the morning, as the storm waned to a whisper, Elias stirred beneath the blanket. His eyes opened not to the wooden ceiling, but to Naomi, curled against him, her face resting on his chest, arms holding as if to keep him from fading. He lay still a long while, watching the strands of hair tangled from the long night, his rough fingers brushing through, pausing on the dark cheek lit faintly by the fire's dying glow. A peace unlike any he had known settled deep, different from all his lonely years before. Naomi stirred, lashes fluttering open. Their eyes met in fragile quiet, free of storm, free of rumor. "Thank you," Elias whispered, voice low, still edged with the chill. "Without you, I'd be gone tonight." Naomi did not answer at once. She only raised her hand to his cheek, gaze wavering but unbroken. Then softly, as if confessing what she had long hidden, she said, "You are not alone anymore, Elias." The space between them dissolved. Elias bent, his mouth meeting hers. At first a broken thank you, then something deeper, steadier. Naomi yielded, her heart pounding, not from the storm outside, but from daring, for the first time, to belong to someone. Firelight warmed their faces, their hands finding one another, slow but sure. In that small cabin, rattling still with the echo of wind, Naomi and Elias gave to each other all the closeness they once thought unearned. Not in fleeting passion, but in the quiet claim that they had found where they belonged. When the storm truly broke and dawn pressed pale at the windows, Naomi lay within his arms, listening to his heart beat steady beneath her ear. Elias held her closer, murmuring into the dim light, Mine. Tears slipped down Naomi's cheeks, but this time they carried no bitterness. They were the sweetest she had known since setting foot in Montana. The blizzard left scars that would not fade. Half the barn collapsed, livestock lost, eaves hanging loose with broken boards. But inside the little wood room where the stove still glowed, Naomi sat beside Elias's bed, fingertips brushing his brow as if to make sure the fever had truly passed. Elias opened his eyes, breath still ragged, but his look clearer than it had been. He moved his lips, voice hoarse from exhaustion. Naomi, I don't know how many more times I'll get to see you close like this. So, I won't wait any longer. Naomi frowned, reached as if to stop him, but Elias waved her off and struggled upright despite the ache in his chest. He took her hand, the same hand that had soothed burned flesh and numbed cold, and whispered, "Take me, Naomi. Not tomorrow, not when the world agrees. Now, I want the world to know you're mine, and I'm yours." The small room grew still. Naomi looked into his storm-gray eyes, seeing both fear and resolve, fear of losing again, the resolve to claim what he had just found. Her heart trembled. Years of scorn, of standing straight beneath the weight of sneers, had never produced a question of what she wanted. Now, the man before her, at his weakest, offered her a choice. She nodded. One simple nod, and Elias exhaled, laughing despite cracked lips. He drew her close, pressed his forehead to hers. A vow breathed low. From now on, no one will take you from me. News of the storm betrothal spread like cold wind across the prairie. That afternoon, as Naomi tended the kitchen fire, a few cowboys leaned on the fence, sneering. So, the colored cook's the new Mrs. Hawthorne? The world's turned upside down. From the kitchen straight into the big house, their words were sour with envy. Naomi tightened her apron, but did not bow. Her eyes met theirs, steady. Just then Elias stepped out, his cloak hanging loose from his shoulders. He walked straight to her and took her work-worn hand before them all. "She," he said, with a firm voice that sounded like command, "is mine." A hush fell. The looks that once held scorn turned to confusion. No longer gossip or mockery. This was a declaration, plain and undeniable. But the tide did not end there. One weekend, Vince Morgan returned, not alone but with 3 hard-faced men at his back. They planted themselves in the middle of the ranch yard, Vince sneering. "Heard this place has a colored girl running the kitchen and running the Hawthorne heart. Should we congratulate them or remind the girl that the past doesn't vanish?" Naomi stepped into view, face calm though her hand hid tremors beneath the apron. Before Elias could speak, Samuel Morse, the longtime foreman, stepped forward, voice rough but steady. "Get off this land, Vince. Hawthorne Ranch has no room for freeloaders like you." One by one, others closed ranks. Theodore with a bandaged arm from the fire, William McKinley smelling of tar, Chester, Arthur leaning on his cane, lined up, a human wall. "What are you going to do?" Elias asked, voice low but steady. Vince looked over the assembled faces and, seeing the community barricaded together, tried a thin laugh that betrayed him. "You think you can shelter her forever? One day—" "Enough," Elias cut him off, eyes cold as ice. "While I stand, Naomi will not stand alone. As for you, pray Montana's wide enough to hide you." No shots rang out. No fists flew. The show of force ended the confrontation. Vince backed away, cursing, dragging his men off, and leaving the yard heavy with tension. Naomi turned to Elias. He gripped her hand again, unshaken. In that instant she understood the betrothal born in the storm was not a fleeting weakness of a snowy night. It was the decision Elias would carry for life. That night, when the ranch lay quiet, Naomi stood on the porch watching snow glint under the moon. Elias came up behind her and draped a heavy coat over her shoulders. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. She shook her head. A warm tear fell. "Never." He bent to kiss her hair, a promise like wind that held the weight of a mountain. "Then from now on, we're no longer outsiders. You and I, we're family." When the blizzard passed, the snow melted into narrow streams threading across the prairie, leaving behind Montana's rare, clear blue sky. But peace never lingered long. One afternoon, as Naomi kneaded dough in the kitchen, Samuel Morse brought in a stranger. The woman was dressed neatly, her smile thin as a blade. Naomi froze. It was Esther Stanton, the boarding house keeper in Wyoming, the place where Naomi had endured her darkest days. "Naomi Carter," Esther drawled, her voice sweet yet acrid. "I hear you've become the fine lady of Hawthorne Ranch." A wooden horse turned swan. Imagine that Naomi steadied herself. "What do you want?" Esther tilted her head, eyes sly. "Oh, not much. Just a few $100. Enough to keep quiet about the work you did under my roof. Otherwise, I fear your betrothed and this whole ranch won't see you as such a saint anymore." Her words fell heavy, like stones breaking the still surface of a pond. Naomi gripped the table edge, shame rising. Memories of bitter nights, watchful stares, sweat paid in coins. I owe you nothing," Naomi stammered. "I worked and paid every cent." Esther shrugged, the gesture smug. "Work is work. But what about the meals you ate, the clothes on your back, the shoes on your feet? You think all that was free? Folks out there won't care what's true. They only need a reason to spit on you again." Naomi stood rooted. She had fought her whole life to escape the shadows. But with one whisper, one shard of the past, all could crumble. The kitchen door opened. Mary Lincoln stepped in, followed by two ranch women. They had heard enough. Mary folded her arms, her gaze sharp as steel. "Mrs. Stanton," she said, her voice colder than a knife, "we don't buy and sell dignity here. Naomi owes you nothing but contempt." Esther laughed harshly. "You country wives think your words carry weight? All I need is a whisper in town, and the whole community will turn its back on her." "Then whisper," Elizabeth Blackwell, the doctor's wife, replied flatly. "We'll say you came here to extort her. And trust me, they'll believe Naomi before they believe a vulture who feeds on desperate women." Naomi's eyes widened. The women who once seemed distant, wary, now stood before her like a wall. Mary turned to her, laying a firm hand on Naomi's shoulder. "Child, the past is no chain. It only binds if you let it. Today, we cut it loose." Footsteps sounded on the porch. The door swung wide and Elias entered, his coat dusted with snow, his breath white in the air. He stopped at once when he saw Esther, his eyes darkening. "What's this?" Esther slipped into a honeyed tone. "Oh, I only came to collect what's mine." "She owes me," Elias didn't question further. He crossed the room, standing beside Naomi. and cast his voice so all could hear. Naomi owes nothing but our gratitude. Everything she has done for this ranch, for each soul here, has repaid tenfold any lie you tell, and anyone who touches her honor touches me. Naomi felt his hand close over hers, tight, leaving Esther no ground to argue. Esther faltered, then sneered. You think a few words of defense erase the past? People will still remember. They will whisper, let them whisper, Elias answered, his gaze locked hard. And I will speak louder, that Naomi Carter is the strongest woman in Montana, and she is the one I've chosen to walk beside for life. The room held its breath. The women nodded in unison. A few cowboys had gathered at the doorway, standing silent at Elias's back. No guns were raised, no threats needed. The unity of their eyes alone was enough to unsettle Esther. Clutching her bag, she backed toward the door. You'll regret this, she spat. One day, truth will catch her. The door slammed behind her, the wind carrying her shadow away into the snow. Naomi trembled. Elias turned her to face him, his hands steady on her shoulders. You owe no one, Naomi. Never let them use your past to break you. You've walked out of it, and you are here. With me. Naomi's vision blurred. She could only nod, then collapse into his chest, hearing the firm beat of his heart drown out every cruel whisper. Outside, the ranch settled back to stillness, and in the warmth of that kitchen fire, Naomi felt, for the first time, certain of one truth. She no longer fought alone. Montana's winter was merciless, the wind howling down from the ridges, carrying snow that coated every trail in white. Yet inside the small wooden church at the town's center, warmth rose from the fire in the hearth, from rows of candles, and from the hush of a waiting community. Behind a wooden screen, Naomi stood clutching a bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning. Snow blossoms, sprigs of pine, bound with a plain ribbon Mary Lincoln had pressed into her hand. Her dress was deep blue wool, not satin, not velvet, but well-stitched fabric made by the women of the ranch. When she caught her reflection in the frosted mirror, she no longer saw the wandering girl who once knocked on doors for work. She saw a woman about to claim her place in the world. The door creaked. Mary nodded gently. It's time, child. Naomi drew a deep breath and stepped out. In the main hall, Elias waited. He wore a black vest, a white shirt, his hair combed neat. But it was not his clothes that stilled the room. It was the way his eyes lit when Naomi appeared. That gaze swept past every scar, every whisper of rumor, and rested only on her, as if the rest of the world had dissolved. Whispers stirred. She's wearing blue? A colored woman in the church? Elias Hawthorne's truly marrying her? But the murmurs faltered beneath Elias's steady silence. He stepped down from the altar, hand extended. Naomi placed hers in his, trembling. When his fingers closed around hers, the church held only the sound of their hearts. The pastor opened the book, his voice deep. We are gathered here to witness the joining of Elias Hawthorne and Naomi Carter. Each vow rang like chains falling away inside Naomi. When Elias swore, to stand beside you through every winter storm. His voice shook, but his eyes never left her. And when her turn came, she lifted her chin, voice clear. I vow never to let you walk alone in shadow or in light. When the minister declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Elias cupped her chin with care. The kiss was not hurried, not fierce but steady and deep as a hidden spring. The hall fell into reverent silence. A few men cleared their throats. Women dabbed at their eyes. That silence itself became its own kind of recognition. Outside, snow fell again. On the church steps, Naomi and Elias emerged. A little girl darted forward, pressing a wildflower into Naomi's hand and whispering, "You're so pretty." Tears welled, but they were not bitter ones. Those who once mocked stood back. No jeers came, only hesitant nods, hats lifted in quiet respect. Not all hearts had softened, but that day's wedding forced them to see Naomi no longer as an outsider, but as part of them. Mary leaned close as they crossed the snowy yard. "You've done it, child. Today isn't just your victory, it's ours." That night, the celebration filled the big barn. Long wooden tables groaned with bread, stew, and hot cider. Fiddles played, children's laughter rang, women danced in heavy skirts. Naomi was pulled from one table to another, showered with awkward but earnest blessings. Elias, across the room, never let his gaze stray far from her. Each time their eyes met, he gave a small nod, as if to say, "I am here." And Naomi, for the first time in years, believed she truly belonged. When the crowd thinned, Elias led her outside. Snow drifted fine across the yard, blanketing the trail. He pulled off his glove and clasped her hand, still trembling faintly. "Naomi," he said softly, "since the day you stepped into the ranch kitchen, I've not been the same. But I never dreamed we'd stand here now. I am proud to call you my wife, before them all." Naomi smiled, pressing her cold hand to his cheek. "And I, for the first time, believe the past no longer chains me. Because of you. Because of all of them," Elias kissed her hand. "From now on, you'll never stand alone. This wedding is not only ours, it is a declaration. Love bears no color, no prejudice strong enough to erase it." Naomi laid her head on his shoulder. In the winter wind, beneath the faint barn light, they stood, fingers entwined, etching their vow into the snow itself. They had endured, and together they would endure still. By the next spring, wildflowers crept back across the prairie, heralding new beginnings. Inside the ranch house, the cry of a newborn split the air, clear, piercing, shattering every old prejudice that had clung to Naomi Carter's life. She lay spent upon the bed, sweat damp on her brow, arms wrapped tight around the tiny, red, trembling form of a baby girl. Elias knelt beside her, eyes rimmed red, his hand shaking as he touched the infant's curled fingers. "Grace," Naomi whispered, her lips dry, her eyes alight. "Her name is Grace, for she is the gift of hope." Elias nodded, voice breaking, but a smile warming his face more than any fire had in winter. "Grace Hawthorne," he said softly, "our child." Word swept through town faster than spring wind. Naomi Carter had borne a daughter. The whispers came, but they no longer carried scorn. People remembered her braving the fire, standing proud at her wedding, and now holding her firstborn. Women came bearing gifts: cloth for swaddling, a woolen blanket, a jar of honey. Mary Lincoln was first, cradling little Grace in her calloused hands and murmuring, "This child will grow knowing love, not fear." Naomi's eyes blurred. Never had she believed the day would come when those who once sneered would stand around her as if she were truly a wife, a mother. But Montana never let joy rest easy. One evening, as the sky burned crimson with sunset, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Naomi, holding Grace in her arms, stepped to the porch. Her breath caught when she saw the face. Vince Morgan. He no longer carried the polish he once had, but the bitterness in his eyes remained sharp as ever. Two rough men flanked him, pistols heavy on their belts. "Naomi Carter?" Vince called, voice slick. "Or should I say, Mrs. Hawthorne? Word is you've had a daughter." "I came to congratulate." Naomi clutched Grace tighter. "Stay away," he smirked. "I only wish to talk. But you know, this country's dangerous. A fire, an accident, a child gone missing. Who can say?" His words sliced cold through her chest. Naomi turned, ready to call for Elias, but the kitchen door burst open. Mary Lincoln stepped out, pistol in hand, her eyes lit fierce. "Enough, Vince," she said flatly. Behind her came others, Elizabeth Blackwell, Prudence Fillmore, and the younger women of the ranch. Some carried shotguns, some axes, others pitchforks, but they all stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall before the porch. Naomi froze. Once she had faced danger alone. Now these women, long silent, rose as her shield. Vince faltered, not expecting this. "You think a gaggle of women can stop me?" he sneered. Mary's finger tightened on the trigger, her gaze like steel. "We can do enough to see you off this land." Last time the men stood. This time it's our turn. Silence stretched taut as wire. Then Elias stepped into the yard with several cowhands at his back, faces hard. He strode straight to Naomi, his wife and child, his eyes locking on Vince with a finality that shut every door. "You lay a hand on them again," Elias said, his voice deep as thunder, "and by winter the snow will cover your name on a rotten plank of pine. Go, and don't return." Vince looked around, at the women whose rifles did not shake, at the men whose eyes left no mercy. His jaw tightened. He swung into his saddle, snarling as he turned away. "This isn't over." The hoofbeats faded into distance. Only then did Naomi realize her arms were trembling around Grace, but her tears were not of fear. Elias wrapped her and the baby close, while Mary and the women lowered their weapons, standing nearby like a wider embrace. Naomi whispered, voice breaking, "For the first time, I don't feel alone." Elias pressed his cheek to her hair. "Because you never were alone, Naomi. You have us. A true family." She held Grace closer, letting her tears soak the woolen blanket. In her heart, she knew the child was not only hope for her and Elias, but for the whole community learning to stand together, to guard each other against the dark. That summer, the town of Hawthorne seemed to shine in a different way. Along the main street, between the blacksmith's forge and the general store, a new wooden building stood, raised plank by the strength of neighbors. Its door was painted a pale brown, its windows always warm with light, and above hung a modest sign, Carter's Kitchen. Naomi had spent many nights before daring to place her name upon that sign. Carter had once been tied to shame, to whispers and ridicule. Yet standing at this new threshold, she chose to prove that the name could carry hope instead. On opening day, townsfolk came half doubtful, half curious. They tried the rich chicken soup, the golden loaves crisp from the oven, the dark coffee brewed at dawn. They left and returned the next day, this time with friends. Soon, Carter's Kitchen became more than a place to eat. It was where people came to feel safe, to be welcomed. Orphaned children slipped in for scraps of bread, and Naomi slipped them more. The blacksmith, worn from a long day, found a cup of coffee at no charge. Most of all, young women cast out from boarding houses or trapped in shame and hardship came seeking refuge. Naomi never asked about their pasts. She asked only, "Do you want to begin again?" And when they nodded, she brought them into the kitchen, showing how to knead dough, slice vegetables, wipe tables, brew coffee. At night, they slept in the loft above, where timid laughter began to replace tears. Mary Lincoln, often stopping by to help, once sat watching Naomi teach a thin girl to skim the froth from a pot of soup. Mary shook her head, smiling softly. "Child, you've built more than a kitchen. You've built a family." Naomi blinked back tears. For years, she had only prayed for a home of her own. Now Carter's kitchen had become a home for many. One hot afternoon, as Naomi set a tray of fresh bread upon the windowsill, hoofbeats rang out on the street. The room hushed. A figure dismounted, and Naomi recognized him at once. Vince Morgan. It had been long since she'd seen him. His clothes were worn, his face gaunt, his eyes stripped of arrogance, left only with weariness. Naomi laid down her knife, smoothing her apron with steady hands. She stood tall. Once his shadow had haunted her, but not now. Vince removed his hat, voice rough. "I didn't come for trouble. I heard you plan to open a shelter, a place for women to stay, to learn work, to be free from cruelty. I want to give something." He set a thick envelope on the counter. Inside, Naomi knew, was money. The air stilled. The girls in the kitchen froze, watching. A few customers shifted, ready to defend her. But Naomi raised her hand, eyes fixed on Vince. "What do you want in return?" she asked evenly. "Nothing," Vince sighed. "Call it penance. I've ruined lives, spread fear, and ended with nothing. I don't expect forgiveness. But maybe this money can keep someone from suffering as you once did." Naomi looked at the envelope. Old memories surged. Cold nights, cruel words, the weight of shame she thought buried. A part of her longed to fling the money back in his face. Yet when she glanced around, saw the girls at the door, eyes alight with hope for safety, she knew she had no right to be selfish. She nodded once. "I'll take it. But not for you, I take it for them." Vince's shoulders sagged. "Then it's the first right thing I've done in my life. If you can, believe I've changed." Naomi said nothing. She only watched him turn and walk away, fading into the heat of the setting sun. No trace of the man who once terrified her. Later, when the shop was quiet, Elias came in. He found Naomi seated at the table, the envelope untouched before her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" Naomi smiled faintly, though her eyes were still red. "All right. Just strange. The man who once tried to snuff me out now kneels to keep the fire burning." Elias sat beside her, his hand closing over hers, firm and warm. "Perhaps you're the reason he changed. Not by words, but by how you live. By rising, rebuilding, and pulling others with you." Naomi gazed out the window, where the evening sun gilded the sign above the door. Carter's kitchen glowed against the sky. In it, she saw herself, not the outcast, but the builder. She set her hand on Elias's, whispering, "We're not just building a kitchen, Elias. We're building a community." He nodded, weary smile warm. "And someday, when our daughter is grown, Grace will be proud. Her mother turned the past into hope for an entire town. Naomi closed her eyes, letting a tear slip, not of pain, but of gratitude. Carter's kitchen glowed through the night. Outside, darkness spread across the prairie. But inside that little wooden house, the fire of community burned, one small flame at a time. 10 years, long in measure, yet fleeting as a prairie wind. For Naomi Carter, each passing day left its mark. Calluses etched into her palms, fine lines at the corners of her eyes, strands of silver threading through her dark curls. Yet in return, her heart had never known such peace. Montana remained relentless. Winters cloaked the land in white. Summers burned dry, and the mountain wind still howled without end. But on the corner of the town's main street, Carter's kitchen glowed each morning, its windows spilling warmth, its walls echoing with children's laughter each evening. That kitchen was no longer merely a place to eat. It had become the very soul of the community. Naomi sat on a wooden chair upon the porch, a woolen shawl over her shoulders. Beside her, Elias, his own hair streaked with gray, held her hand in silence. They sat together, watching the steady rhythm of townsfolk passing by. Children dashed past with warm loaves clutched tight. Young women, once broken by poverty or shame, now strode with confidence, baskets of produce in hand, their faces lit by new smiles. In each of them, Naomi glimpsed her younger self, the girl once called worthless, who knocked on doors begging for work. But unlike that girl, these women now walked tall. Naomi's memories came back sharp as yesterday. The first day at Hawthorne Ranch, when every eye burned with scorn. The torn dress in the kitchen, when Elias knelt to cover her with his coat. The night of fire, when she carried children through smoke. The blizzard, when Elias asked her to marry him with trembling breath. The winter wedding, where doubt turned into silent recognition. And the birth of Grace, whose first cry shattered every whisper of prejudice. Each moment had been a heavy stone laid upon her shoulders, but together they paved the road she had walked. Carter's kitchen had sustained her family, but more than that, it had become refuge for dozens of women. Wives escaping cruel hands, girls cast aside and mocked. Naomi opened the door to them all. A bowl of hot soup, a blanket, and the familiar words, "You need not tell your past. Only if you want to begin again." Some stayed, becoming pillars of the kitchen. Others left to open shops of their own in distant towns. Yet all carried with them Naomi's lesson. The past does not define you. Each time Naomi saw a once trembling girl stand firm in that kitchen, she knew Carter's kitchen was fulfilling its purpose. One autumn afternoon, Naomi saw a familiar figure step inside. Vince Morgan. His hair was now white, his frame stooped, his gait uneven. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by weariness. He walked to the counter, dropped a few coins into the women's shelter fund jar, and murmured, "Thank you for doing what I never could." Then he turned and left, his bent figure fading into the golden light. Naomi did not weep. She only exhaled softly. The past had closed itself, without the need for forgiveness spoken aloud. That night, when the guests were gone, Naomi and Elias sat on the porch. The scent of fresh bread lingered in the air, while Grace's laughter rang from inside. Grace was a young woman now, working in the kitchen, teaching the younger girls, a pride that filled both parents' hearts. Elias looked at his wife, his eyes still steady and tender as they had been 10 years before. "We've come a long way, Naomi," she smiled. "From someone they called trash to a woman with a family, a community, and a kitchen that gives hope." She leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "The past does not define us. What we choose for our lives, that is what endures." Elias tightened his grip on her hand, sealing her words into his heart. Beyond the porch, Carter's kitchen cast its glow onto the street. And within that light, Naomi knew her story had grown beyond herself. It had become the legacy of a community. Friends, the story of Naomi Carter is not a distant legend, but proof that even on the harshest land, hope can take root. Once cast aside, called worthless, driven into the corners of prejudice, Naomi chose to stand. She did not strike back with bitterness, but with an open kitchen, a home, a shelter for those who suffered as she once did. And so, with silver hair, Naomi could sit beside Elias, smiling at the bustling street, knowing she had built not only a family, but a community. That was the truest reward. Not money, not status, but love, peace, and the faith carried forward to another generation. Perhaps you, listening now, in the autumn years of life, may see your own reflection in Naomi's tale. Who among us has not been misunderstood, belittled, or tempted to believe we had no worth? Yet like Naomi, we hold the right to choose, to forgive instead of hate, to build instead of destroy, to love instead of fear. Think on it. How often the smallest things, a smile, a warm bowl of soup, a hand held out, become proof that we still belong. That too is Naomi's legacy. The past does not define us. What we choose for our lives, that is what endures. If this story reminds you of a memory, a lesson, or someone dear in your own life, please share it in the comments below. We treasure every word, every feeling from those who journey with us. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next story. Tales where love, kindness, and human strength continue to shine. Thank you for staying with us to the end, for listening with your heart. May you leave with warmth and believe this. At any age, after any loss, we can begin again and leave behind a gentle lesson for tomorrow.